Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. This wildfire season is now BC's most destructive on record, and it's only the middle of July. We'll get the very latest info on the province's forest fires and speak to an expert about how breathing in the smoke from those fires can have both short and long-term effects. And are you a Swiftie, or did you ever have Beatlemania? We'll take a look at who is most likely to become a superfan and whether some people take their obsession too far. I'm Amy Bell, in for Michelle Elliott, and this is BC Today. As we know, this year's wildfire season is particularly bad. So in this half hour, we'll be hearing more about the smoke that comes along with those fires and what you can do to protect yourself. But first, we'll share the latest information from the province on the wildfire situation. We're joined now by CBC reporter Joel Ballard. He's been monitoring an update from BC's Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, Bowen Ma. Hi, Joel.
Hi, Amy.
So what has Minister Ma said in the past hour?
Well, over this weekend, we had a large uptick in fire activity. There has now been more than 1.39 million hectares burned in British Columbia. I heard you mention this off the top. That makes it the most destructive wildfire season in our history since we've been recording that data. Mm-hmm. And we also heard from Minister Ma that right now we are in the thick of the wildfire season, but it's also nowhere near the end. This is going to continue for the foreseeable future. Amy?
And BC has, I guess, extra boots on the ground now that the Canadian Armed Forces have landed, along with firefighters from other countries. What do we know about how these extra resources will sort of now be deployed?
Sure. So Minister Ma said the Canadian Armed Forces will be focused specifically on fighting wildfires, while the Canadian Coast Guard will also be helping out in more of a management and operations sense. We know that the first deployment of Canadian Armed Forces is going to be to the Burns Lake area. That's in the Northeastern Fire Center, where we've seen the most wildfire activity this season. Right. There's also going to be another deployment to Vanderhoof. That's in the Prince George Fire Center.
Okay, and Minister Ma mentioned the drought and the water shortage the province is experiencing right now. What did she say about how seriously people should be taking their own water use?
Well, Minister Ma did not mince her words. This is a serious drought situation that is likely to get worse through the summer into the fall, and we can even feel those effects late into next year. And she was clear when she said, we need to make sure that everyone is doing their part to conserve water, whether that's through turning off the tap when you're brushing your teeth, taking shorter showers, small things like washing your vehicles less or watering your lawns less. And also she mentioned that businesses are being asked to do their part as well. And she did say that if these voluntary measures don't have the impact that they're looking for, that they will implement restrictions if needed.
Okay. In addition to Minister Ma, we also heard from representatives from the agricultural industry in BC. So how is the season impacting farmers?
Yeah, so we heard from Minister of Agriculture, Pam Alexis, and she said, you know, look at what we're dealing with. We're dealing with wildfires, we're dealing with drought. And of course, that's also having an impact on our agriculture. Cattle farmers, specifically dairy farmers, they're having trouble finding enough hay, finding enough feed to feed their livestock. And they're being forced to make really difficult decisions about the future of that herd, possibly thinning their herds or selling off a part of their herds. Now, she did mention that there is provincial support. She is working with the industry, and those supports are available to try and help them through this time.
And sort of lastly, what do we know, if anything, about the upcoming forecast and what's in store for the province in just the next few weeks?
Well, people might have noticed over the weekend, yesterday specifically, it was a bit cooler. We had that cloud coverage. Minister Ma mentioned that the winds are coming in. They're going to push that cloud coverage away. They're going to push that smoke coverage away. And as the skies clear up, the temperatures are going to rise. It's going to be hotter. And of course, that extra heat is only going to exacerbate the wildfire situation further.
All right.
Amy?
Well, we'll let you get inside and catch some shade now. Thanks so much, Joel.
Am I burning?
Maybe a little. All right,
Okay,
Joel Ballard
thank you.
is a CBC reporter. He's been monitoring the latest from the province on the wildfire situation. And people often say it's not just the heat, it's the humidity. But what is the difference and how do they impact you and your health? As we see climate change leading to more hot and humid weather, how will areas used to much drier conditions, such as parts of BC or Alberta, adapt to these more muggy days? CBC News climate and science specialist Darius Mandavi joins us now to explain it all. Hi, Darius.
Hello.
So, what exactly is humidity? Because we're not used to it here. We're not, totally sure.
No. It's really not something that we're familiar with here. It's really just a measure of how much water is in the air. You might have heard of either absolute or relative humidity. Absolute humidity isn't that useful for our day-to-day lives. It's a measure of how much water is physically in the air.
Okay.
So we're talking about the actual amount. Relative humidity is much more useful. The air can hold more or less water depending on how warm it is. The warmer the air, the faster the molecules move, the farther apart they are, and the more water can be held in it. So the relative humidity is a measure of what percent of the amount of water that's possible to be held in the air at that temperature is in it. So if you have a 30% relative humidity at 20 degrees, that's much less humid and muggy than 30% humidity at 30 degrees.
Okay. It sounds very sciencey. So how does the impact of the heat and humidity, how does that have on what sort of effect does that have on a person's ability to deal with the heat or to stay cool?
Right. Well, we can get much less sciencey here.
Okay.
It's a massive impact. Well, maybe a little bit sciencey. One of the main ways that we cool off is by sweating.
Okay.
So when we sweat, the water droplets carry a lot of the heat out of our body, and then when that sweat evaporates, it takes the heat with it.
Okay.
When we have higher humidity, there's more water already in the air, and so it has less ability to take that heat away from us. So here in BC, we have much more dry heat, which means that it's hot, but the air is really good at taking our sweat and carrying it away with us, so we don't feel as sweaty, and we don't carry that heat as well.
Okay.
Whereas where I'm from, back in Ontario, people don't care what the actual temperature is in the summer. We only care what the humidex is, which is Canada's unique way of measuring how much humidity, what the temperature really feels like to us, because we can't cool off as well. And so people don't care what the actual temperature is. We just want to know, what does it feel like? How much sweat is going to be sticking to me today?
And that's a very foreign concept to us here in the western parts of the country. Humidex is not something we typically talk about. So why is it such a concern now for areas like BC and even parts of Alberta? Why now?
You're right. We don't talk about it at all.
No.
In fact, pretty much across the country, heat warnings can be triggered either by the actual temperature or the humidex.
Okay.
Here in BC and in Alberta, there's no trigger for humidex because it's just a non-issue.
Okay.
But what we're seeing is that because of climate change, models indicate that we're not just seeing higher temperatures, we're seeing more humid conditions. We're likely to see more humid conditions as the climate warms. So what's currently a non-issue, and we don't even think about it when we're issuing heat warnings, is likely to become a much bigger problem.
Okay. And how can people sort of manage those effects of humidity? We sort of have learned some tricks to deal with just the heat itself, but how about the humidity as well? What can people do to mitigate that?
You're right. Because this is not something that we think about now, especially in places where we don't see a lot of humidity, people probably won't know how to adjust.
Okay.
For the most part, you do the same things. You need to stay hydrated, have lots of electrolytes, stay in a cool place if you can. One of the big differences where it's really important to know whether it's the actual temperature that's making it a heat wave or whether it's the humidity is if the actual temperature is above body temperature, so 36 to 37 degrees Celsius. If it's the actual temperature, a fan is not going to cool you off. It's going to heat you up more because the air blowing on you, it's like a blow dryer instead of a fan.
Interesting.
Whereas if it's 36 degrees with the humidex, it would still cool you off. It just might be a bit muggy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And tell us about this new CBC heat and humidity tool that people can use. They can access this online. So what exactly is it?
Oh, it's so cool.
Okay.
A lot of the CBC interactives right now we've been putting out are really awesome.
They're
I use the
amazing.
CBC climate one all the time to see like how today's temperature compares to past temperatures.
It's fascinating
Super
and
useful.
terrifying.
Yes, terrifying indeed. But this one is also really great because it tells you how many days in a year your city currently sees temperatures of above 35 degrees with the humidex.
Okay.
And how likely you are to see those temperatures 50 years in the future, given different climate situations. So for instance, if we take Vancouver, right now, we usually see 1 day a year above 35 degrees Celsius with the Humidex.
Okay.
In 50 years, under a low emissions scenario where we reach net zero, so,
We all do our work.
yes,
make
exactly.
change.
We're still going to see 6 degrees rather than 1 because we've already put so much carbon into the atmosphere. We have this delayed effect.
All right.
In a mid-emission scenario where we do cut down, but we don't get to net zero, we're talking 10 days.
Okay.
If we continue at the pace we're going right now, 27 days.
Oh, okay. That's a
Yeah.
big leap.
Yes, huge leap. So it is massively important. You can see
Yeah.
in BC places like Victoria, Kelowna, Kamloops, Prince George. Those are all on there. I won't read out all the numbers because I doubt people want to hear me run through a long list, but you should check it out.
Yeah, just go to CBC and you can access that yourself. And thank you. It's nice to have just a little bit of an explainer of what's happening because it has. There's been a lot of us saying the last little while, like it feels sticky, it feels muggy, but we're just so unused to it. So thank you for some clarification.
Yes, we don't want BC to feel like Ontario.
No, we don't. That's our CBC News climate science, our news climate and science specialist, Darius Madavi. And all the wildfires that are across BC, of course, means there's a lot of smoke. And government and health authorities are warning people about the dangers it brings. The BC Coroner Service has issued a public safety bulletin on the matter, and they say those with heart and lung conditions, along with the elderly and young children, are especially at risk. So today we want to hear from you. How do you manage wildfire smoke when it comes in? What help do you want to see from governments? Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star pound 690 on your cell phone, and you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. You can also watch BC Today streaming live on CBC Gem, the CBC Vancouver YouTube channel, and on cbc.ca/BC. Now, for more on this, we've reached Dr. Emily Brigham. She's an assistant professor at UBC's Faculty of Medicine and respirologist. Hi, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, so this is obviously on top of mind for a lot of people the last few days. Can you take us through some of the conditions people should be extra cautious about when wildfire smoke rolls in?
Yeah, absolutely. So when thinking about folks who may have higher susceptibility to the health effects of wildfire smoke, they're the same people that you mentioned.
Right.
So folks who are at the extremes of age, infants, young children, folks who are at higher ages and the elderly. We're also thinking about anyone with underlying medical conditions, but particularly individuals with heart or lung conditions. I treat a lot of patients with asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and those folks are at heightened risk. We also think about folks who are pregnant as well. So we want to take extra steps to protect those populations too.
And earlier this week, of course, tragically, we did have a 9-year-old child die who had asthma, and the parents do suspect that the wildfire smoke did contribute to his asthma attack. Is that something that, unfortunately, we might see as more common, that people are really being triggered by these wildfire smoke issues?
Yeah, it's a very high concern. I think we have to be very aware and provide a lot of resources for those that we know and we recognize are susceptible. That is just a horrible tragedy to have happened, and my heart goes out to the parents and the family. I know there's a GoFundMe page. I would encourage everybody to go and contribute. I think it's really going to take a community to come together to provide all the resources that people need to be the safest that they can be.
Right. And we do talk about smoke impacting people that we know have pre-existing conditions, but how does smoke inhalation impact sort of otherwise healthy people?
So a lot of what we see are symptoms,
Okay.
and that's what we know the most. So you can think about watery eyes, burning in the lungs, sort of feeling like your heart is beating faster, discomfort on breathing, wheezing, cough, and so forth. And it's really important to listen to your body. So if you are out in an area where there's high amounts of smoke and you're feeling those symptoms, you need to get to cleaner air as fast as possible.
Okay.
But we know about the acute symptoms or the acute signs of exposure to wildfire smoke and some of those symptoms. And we know about what can happen in patients who've got underlying disease. They can have exacerbations, worsening of their disease, need to present to care and receive extra medications from their doctor.
Yeah.
One thing that we don't know as much about are the long-term effects of these continuous exposures to wildfire smoke. So something we're working on. But regardless, we should try to avoid it and get to cleaner air as much as is possible.
Yeah, and I think it's common knowledge we don't want to be breathing in smoke, but I do think a lot of people sort of feel like if they're healthy and not dealing with any lung issues that they might be less susceptible. Speaking of being, I guess, more vulnerable though, what makes young children so vulnerable to wildfire smoke?
So it's all not entirely clear, but
Okay.
young children do breathe faster. The surface area of the lungs, so how much space in the body is actually interacting with smoke, is
Oh,
much
okay.
higher compared to their body mass. So kids, that ratio, there's a lot more surface area in the lungs than there is to body mass. So they may be getting a higher effective dose. And kids are also pretty active. They run around as part of breathing faster. They're using their lungs a lot.
Right.
And so they may be getting higher effective doses of the smoke.
Oh, interesting. So I guess
Yeah.
then too, one thing to do is just make sure that, well, if you can, make sure they stay calm and maybe, not be tearing around as kids tend to do.
Yeah, I will say that's tough. I've got, I've got young kids myself.
As soon
That
as I
maybe
was saying it, I
unachievable
was
advice.
like, no, that's
No,
very
maybe not.
difficult. Yeah, especially in
Yeah,
the
it's
summer.
tough, but I think if your kids are having symptoms, get them to cleaner air and bring them inside as best as you can. And then really
Yeah.
communities and health providers and so forth, knowing which kids are more susceptible, we really just have to do a wraparound approach and do everything we can to have the best health outcomes as possible.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
interesting that you mentioned that because we hear that sort of time and time again when dealing with the wildfire issues and evacuations. It's the sense of community that we really all have to be more aware of each other and our neighbors and our family members and sort of identify who's most vulnerable so that we're quick to take action to protect them. So I think that's a very good reminder. I would love the audience to join in though to let us know how you deal with the wildfire smoke, if you yourself are vulnerable and any concerns that you might have about how that's impacting your health. You can give us a call at 1-800-825-5950. Also 604-669-3733. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. And we're just trying to figure out how this is going to impact us as we're seeing such tremendous amounts of smoke. Every year it seems to be more and more. And I'll ask you, if people can't avoid being outside when there's smoke, would wearing, say, a mask help to mitigate the damage? We've gotten used to wearing masks for protection. Does that work where smoke is related?
Yes, there is
Okay.
some benefit to wearing a mask, but it depends on what kind of mask. And so N95s, KN95s that we think of as being the most effective for COVID are also potentially the most effective for wildfire smoke, as long as they're well fitting. Turns out like a standard medical mask, a triple layer mask may have some moderate benefit in wearing that if it's well fitted. Things like single layer cloth masks, whether you wet them or keep them dry, aren't really going to do much to reduce what you're inhaling in terms of the PM 2.5. And I think that's important too. And I say PM 2.5, I know that's come up in a lot of conversations around wildfire smoke. That is one of the pollutants that is at very high levels in wildfire smoke, is highly tied to health effects. PM stands for particulate matter.
Okay.
The 2.5 means smaller, so it can get deeper into the lungs, and even the smallest parts can translocate into the bloodstream. And those are really the things that can be filtered out by some of these masks. Wildfire smoke is a complex mixture of not only PM, but also a number of gaseous components and so forth. So wearing a mask doesn't completely eliminate your risk of exposure, but it can do something to help more likely with the PM 2.5.
Okay. And
So really, yeah, go ahead.
No, you continue.
Yeah. So getting to cleaner air is really, really the best you can do if possible.
Okay. And I think, too, that's something that I was reminded of earlier today, that depending, we think of it as a forest fire. It's not just trees and bushes that are burning. A lot of these fires can sweep through towns, and that means you are burning a lot of different components that have chemicals in them. And all of that, of course, is going to impact the damage to your lungs, I would assume.
Yeah, absolutely. We know through studies that these different components can have different effects, but all can irritate the lungs. And so in combination, it's highly concerning.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And what can people do sort of around their homes or even their workplaces to make sure they're safe from smoke? I know speaking with a lot of our colleagues last week near our Prince George Bureau, they were all very hoarse. They were having difficulty, even speaking and and breathing, just because of the smoke that was getting into them as they were making their way to work and covering the stories.
There's a lot you can do. And I think because there's so much you can do, it can start to be overwhelming for
Right.
individuals. And there are some people who can't do everything. And we want everybody to feel empowered with what they can do. So when you're thinking about your commute, if you're going back and forth to work, if you do have to go outside, keeping a mask handy when you're transitioning between vehicles. If you're in a vehicle, you want to be in one that is recirculating the air that's inside of the vehicle with a filter in place. So if you're riding to work and you're driving and you have air conditioning or something else on, close the vents in your car, put it on recirculate mode, and that allows that air to be filtered through the filters, through the HEPA filters that are in your car.
Okay.
I would recommend when it's very smoky days, you may, if possible, try to avoid active commuting and then exercise where you really are taking super deep breaths and breathing in a lot of the smoke and so forth. But really, we do what we can and stop if you have symptoms. In terms of homes and in terms of where people are living, so the standard recommendation is to remain inside on smoky days. That gets a little bit tricky when you have a heat event too, because we know that heat can get trapped inside the home, and heat can be more dangerous for smoke, even for most people at risk. And so we really have to pay attention to those environments as well. And people may need to relocate for heat. But if it's not getting too hot in your environment or you have air conditioners, things you can do are really aimed at trying to prevent the outside air from getting in and then trying to filter the air that you have inside.
Okay.
So, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say we do have a quick call.
Great.
Tyler in Enderby. Hi, Tyler. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Great. And what's your plan, or how have you been sort of combating all the smoke in the area?
It's actually just exactly what you were talking about. I was going to talk
good.
about our central. We have central air conditioning,
Right.
and of course the furnace. And so I actually just changed the filter out, and I put a MERV rated filter in there. So it's MERV, and there's different ratings that filter out, more or less particles. I personally use a MERV 11. And that seems to filter out everything. I run the fan on the furnace 24 hours a day, and then you can't smell the smoke in the house. You can tell as soon as you walk out the door that it's smoky, but inside you can't.
All right. Well, thank you so much for calling in with your tip. I'm glad that you found a way to sort of manage and stay safe. I believe we've got a call now from Barb in Smithers. Hi, Barb. How are you?
Hi. Good. Thank you for having this.
Of course.
Today.
And how are you faring with the smoky conditions?
Well, one of the things I do is I'm 72 and I'm an asthmatic, and I'm very vigilant. And one of the things I do is I go to a website. It's iqair.com, or you can Google the current air quality for your community. And a lot of the communities have a variety of sites where they're collecting data, and it's monitored, and every hour they're giving new ratings.
Okay.
And if it's a smoky day, when it gets to about 100 on this scale, I don't go out unless I have to.
Okay.
Or if it's higher. And on those, I only open my windows up on days when it's really clear air. Now, I'm fortunate I have a heat pump, so I don't use the air conditioning very often, but I really am very, very careful. And if I have any trouble at all, then I wouldn't go out at all.
That's good.
And I find this is the most useful thing for me.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad that you've sort of found a way to manage things. Dr. Brigham, what would you say about sort of making sure that you stay up to date on the latest information? Is this what we all need to be doing going forward, especially if you already have a pre-existing issue?
Yes. Thank you for highlighting that, Allison and Barb. We need to be aware of what our air quality is. So if you see smoke outside, it's smoky, it's bad, it's high risk. But just because you don't see smoke outside doesn't necessarily mean that the air is high quality. Okay. So there are places like Barb mentioned where you can go to check this. The ones that are recommended, so you can actually sign up for air quality subscription alerts through the Government of Canada. And that is available on the coroner's report. And I bet you CBC has a link, if not planning to put one up.
I do believe so.
Yeah, the WeatherCan app is another really great place to look as well. And those are from government monitors as well. So they're highly sort of, they're checked. They're very well regulated.
That's great.
And are a great place to go. I would also say that I just wanted to commend Barb for really paying attention to her air and so forth, and really thinking about what she's going to do and when she's going to go outside, and trying to take control over her own symptoms.
Yeah, I think, it's wonderful to see people being able to do that with, everything that's at our disposal. But obviously that's something that we need to continue to do as the situation just seems to get worse and worse. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Brigham. I really appreciate you talking about this. I think it's something that many people just need to be more aware of.
Oh, of course. And I do want to, if I can slip one last plug in there.
You can.
So the Canadian Revenue Agency actually will give tax rebates for folks with severe chronic respiratory disease if you get a prescription from your doctor for an air cleaner.
All right.
Please ask your doctor.
All right, doctor's orders. Thank you. That's enjoy the rest of your day. That's Dr. Emily Brigham, an assistant professor at UBC's Faculty of Medicine and respirologist. Coming up, from the Beatles to Beyonce, superfans can be deeply invested in their favorite artists, and preteens are often especially dedicated to their heroes. But is there a point where parents should be concerned? That's coming up right after the 12:30 news with Susan McNamee.
Good afternoon. BC's Emergency Management Minister says the province has a long road ahead of fighting wildfires as the Canadian military gears up to help fire crews battling hundreds of fires in BC. Bowen Maw says federal help from the armed forces and the Canadian Coast Guard is substantial, and they will be deployed to hard-hit areas, including Prince George, Kamloops, Burns Lake, and Vanderhoof. Maw says there will also be help for farmers who are having a hard time providing fresh feed for their livestock. Hospitality workers at 3 hotels in downtown Vancouver have voted in favor of strike action. The union representing those workers at the Hyatt Regency, Western Bayshore, and Pinnacle Harbourfront say job security and cost of living are major issues. More than 1,000 workers, including room attendants, front desk agents, and kitchen staff, could walk off the job this summer. And there may be an agreement to end the 4-month transit strike in the Fraser Valley. The union is recommending bus drivers and other workers accept a deal proposed by a mediator. The employer must respond by Thursday. Turning to the BC weather, as you've been hearing, smoky conditions remain over much of the province. Up in the Peace, a mix of sun and cloud with a 30% chance of showers today, a high of 21. On the north coast, periods of rain, a high of 17. And for the central interior, a mix of sun and clouds, smoky skies, a high of 21. For the southern interior, much the same story. Sunny, strong winds, and a high of 28. Tomorrow, the high could get up to 33. And on the south coast, sunny, a high of 23 today, clear overnight. Tomorrow will be sunny with highs up to 31 inland. That's a brief look at your BC news and weather. I'll be back at 1 with all the latest local, national, and international news. But right now, it's back to Amy Bell and BC Today.
Thanks, Susan. This is, of course, BC Today on CBC Radio. Also live streaming on cbc.ca/BC, CBC Vancouver's YouTube page, and on CBC Gem. Now, things could go one of 2 ways in the long-running Surrey policing saga tomorrow. It could end, or it could mark the start of a legal battle between the province and City Hall. Our municipal affairs reporter, Justin McElroy, explains the background to tomorrow's decision by Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth. It
was 3 months ago that he put in conditions for Surrey to follow if they wanted to get rid of the Surrey Police Service, as new Mayor Brenda Locke has promised. If not, he said he retained the authority to keep them with the Surrey Police Service. So he's gotten those reports from the city. He's looked at this over the last 3 months. He says that Wednesday he will be making that decision. And there's lots of predictions going back and forth, but a lot of people looking at what the province has talked about over the past few weeks in terms of questions about the RCMP around vacancies and skepticism over Surrey's report, believe that he very well might choose to go to a conflict with Surrey and say, you're forced to stick with the Surrey Police Service. For her part, Mayor Locke hasn't shut the door over taking legal action if the province were to do that, saying that they will talk with their lawyers at that time. Most of the time in these cases, the province does get their way. Municipalities are creatures of the province, but we'll have to see hypothetically what happens if the province decides to go down that route and the city follows through with legal action.
And of course, we'll have full live coverage of that announcement on tomorrow's program. And we'll bring you analysis and reaction to whatever the province decides. That's tomorrow, right here on BC Today from 12 noon, 1 o'clock in the Mountain Time Zone. Now, whether it's the Beatles or Beyonce, Elvis Presley to Taylor Swift, popular artists have always had an incredibly dedicated fan base, with preteens especially passionate about their favorites. Even our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, sent a rather cheeky tweet to Taylor Swift asking her to come to Canada on her tour. So, why do some people become so interested or at times even infatuated with certain singers and athletes? And is there a point when it goes too far? We want to hear from you. What artist or sports team are you most passionate about? Do you consider yourself a super fan? Are you worried that your child is becoming too obsessed with someone? Call us 1-800-825-5950. 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca, and you can watch us, BC Today, streaming live on CBC Gem, the CBC Vancouver YouTube channel, and on cbc.ca/BC. Now, joining me now to explain super fandom is Dr. Alexandra Gold, a psychologist, with Mass General Brigham in Boston. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Gold. Okay, so first off, let's just start with the absolute basic. What exactly do you define as a super fan?
A super fan is someone who has a strong emotional or social connection to a public figure, whether it be a singer or a celebrity or an actor, or someone that they really identify with.
And how common is this? I mean, I think we hear about, Taylor Swift's Swifties and the Beehive for Beyonce, and we know people, are fervent fans of certain sports teams. So, what are some of the reasons that a person becomes such a super fan?
I think it's very common, and I think it goes a lot back to identity and how someone identifies with this public figure.
Okay.
What is it about that person that they personally connect with? Do they feel some attachment to them because they're a role model? And also, the fan identity piece in the community is a big part of this connection to other fans.
Well, and I was going to say that seems to be a huge sense. There's this community among certain fan groups, and is that at times, I guess, maybe more important than the actual artist that they admire? Is it the culture of those other fellow superfans that becomes the greatest thing for them?
I think so. I think it's a big part of it. I think connecting to other fans, you see at Taylor Swift's concerts, people are sharing friendship bracelets with one another.
Yeah.
There's really that sense of community and belonging, which helps young people.
Yeah, but at times can that be not dangerous, but does that prevent them from forging closer bonds, say with the people that they go to school with or the peers that they, might see on a more daily basis? Does the sort of super fandom and that sense of community at all stop them from becoming closer to other people?
I think it's a great question. I think it's all about that balance. So sometimes people might have fan friends that they know in real life and they connect with and bond over through that relationship to the celebrity.
Okay.
Sometimes, though, if someone's spending so much of their time online at the exclusion of other aspects of their life, that could be a time to clue in and say, okay, what are other relationships that I'm not investing in?
Right. And is this something that sort of can come as perhaps a phase? Is that something that we, see? We've sort of identified that quite often it's more sort of the younger teens or the preteens that become, so connected to somebody they admire. Is that something they quite often will then mature out of, or do we see it being more long-term now?
I think a lot of it stems back to identity development and formation, where young people are learning about themselves, and they're learning about themselves by observing some of these public figures. So as they go through that process, maybe at some point they might not need that connection as much. But at the same time, we are seeing a lot of adults who also have strong relationships with some of these public figures.
Right. Okay. We'd love to hear from you. You can call us at 1-800-825-5950. Locally at 604-669-3733. You can also email us your experience, either of being a super fan or of knowing one, bctoday@cbc.ca. We want to hear from you. Right now, we'll hear from Daryl in Tofino. Hi, Daryl. How are you? Great. Did you have your own super fandom to share with us?
I sure do.
Okay.
I would have to go back to the 60s and the 70s because there was a great cultural and social revolution going on, sexual revolution. And when I was 8 years old, a group came on TV. I forget, it might have been the Ed Sullivan Show, but here in North America, but it was the Rolling Stones. And following them through the years and seeing them whenever possible, they've been a constant in my life, and I'm really happy for it. Mm. But I love lots of different types of music, but I would have to say that the Rolling Stones really, the Beatles, it took a while to get into culturally relevant and critical songs. But with the Stones, they were the bad boys right from the beginning. That's what they were dubbed. And I like that, not just for being bad, but for something that was bluesy. It was to the heart. It was speaking of social dilemmas and a lot of things we're still dealing with today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so I think that whole era, like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, I mean, just look at the music that came out of that era. But I would have to say, the Stones really topped it. I remember seeing them at Maple Leaf Square Gardens in '72, and it cost $50 for me to buy a ticket to try and get in.
Right.
And just thousands and thousands of people, and how scared the city was, and all the horses and cops on horses and Molotov cocktails, and it turned into a real summertime, hazy evening kind of craziness.
It does sounds like quite an event, but I think you raise a really good point, Daryl. Dr. Gold, I'll ask you to weigh in on that. Sort of the power of these bands and these, I guess, stars to really influence culture and politics. As Daryl was mentioning, sort of in the 60s, we saw a lot of bands really having an influence on people's views of war and drugs and sex. And, recently we saw the Korean pop group BTS, they're sort of super fans, even impacting U.S. politics by, buying tickets to these Trump rallies so that his supporters couldn't use that. Is that something that we, really need to pay more attention to, just how much of an impact and how much influence they can have in other arenas?
Absolutely. I think this also goes back to the social and emotional connection that the caller shared. It's a really great example where I get asked a lot, is this a product of social media? But clearly it's not. This has been going on for many years where there are super fandoms that develop around social causes, emotional connection to the band. Yeah. And I think it's really important to look at these downstream effects.
Yeah, no. And I mean, I recall, my mother and grandmother talking about, the Beatles and Elvis Presley and all the, fainting and security issues around that. So certainly it's not social media. We'll take another call though. This is Rohit in Vancouver. And Rohit, it's not so much musical fandom that you're a part of. It's sports. Let me hear what you have experienced.
Yeah, I grew up watching a soccer team in England called Chelsea FC.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Just one day I saw my brother watching when I was like 7 or 8 years old. Okay. And I said, you know what, let me just watch with you. And then from that moment on, it's been, 20 plus years I've been watching them.
You've been hooked.
And yep, I've been hooked. Doesn't matter what time the game is, 4 in the morning, 12 in the day, doesn't matter. When it's time for them to play, I have to make time and watch them.
Yeah. So does it ever interfere with your life? Does it stop you from doing other things? Have you had to switch work or plans around so you can make sure you're watching a game?
Usually midday games, I plan my lunch around that.
Okay.
So I can just watch the game, and then obviously weekends I don't get to sleep much. because I have to get up at 7 sometimes, and mostly, 7 or 4:30 in the morning. I have to watch them for a couple of hours, and then I go to bed.
All right. And do you have other connections with other fans of this of Chelsea FC? Like, has it formed a bit of a community for you?
There is, There's actually a pub in Yaletown.
Okay.
That's the official pub for Chelsea. Sometimes I go there. That we watch together. We have always full of the pub is always full in the morning. Kind of strange, but people are showing up and we watch the game together.
Oh, well, good to hear it. And thank you so much for calling in, Rohid. Really appreciate it. Dr. Gold, I did want to actually mention this with you, and this brings it up perfectly, but we tend to sort of view, I guess, sports fans and music fans differently, because sports typically will have a higher, maybe older male fan base, while a lot of singers may have a younger female demographic. So how does that impact how we sort of view these various fans? Do we give more, sort of credence to one group than the other?
It's interesting. There is a different way that we might look at these relationships, but I think they are very similar in a lot of ways. I mentioned this a lot, but I do think it goes back to this emotional connection.
Okay.
What is it that ties you to that team or that artist? With sports teams, I think a lot of times there's that homegrown connection. There's something about, for many people, maybe their hometown or their home city that connects them back to the sports team. So it's not so much about the team, but similar to the public figures like celebrities, it is that connection to other people that ties us to that team.
Okay. And again, we'd love to hear from more callers. 1-800-825-5950. You can call us locally, 604-669-3733. If you have a question for Dr. Alexandra Gold, or you just want to share your experience either as a fan, whether you've known a fan, and your views on it. You can also email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. I'll read you an email that we did receive just now from Kathy, and she writes, "You are referring to fans having a relationship with celebrities. They don't. Unless they know them personally, they are strangers." Dr. Gold, what's your take on that?
That's a great comment. I do think that there is a relationship that people often form with celebrities or public figures, but it might be more of a one-sided relationship is the best way to look at it.
Okay.
I still think it is a relationship because they have that connection to that figure,
Right.
whether it be, like I mentioned, that emotional connection, something about that person that they feel relational to. But it is important to note that, yes, usually it is one-sided, where the public figure maybe will respond to a comment that a fan leaves on their social media, but that's a momentary interaction. It's not a long-standing relationship from the side of the celebrity.
Right, and that can sometimes be a bit of a obsession in itself, trying to get a like or a reaction from that fan. Other than that, too, what are some signs maybe that parents could watch out for if they're worried that their child is becoming too much of a fan? Because we do see that quite often with younger, so sort of that preteen area, where they'll become so fiercely dedicated to somebody that it tends to take over everything. So should parents watch out for certain things?
I think a really important thing is to open the door to a conversation. So it's something that a kid can always talk to their parents about. I think being aware if a kid is spending too much time during the day, too many hours online, taking note, okay, what can we do to figure out there's other aspects of your life that would be helpful for us to help you engage in.
Right.
That's the first piece. The second piece, I would say, to be aware of cyberbullying, any signs of that. Again, that open door with your kid allows your kid to feel comfortable to talk with you about any experiences they're having online and any stress or anxiety that might be experienced by a child, because that often does happen if someone is spending too much time in these online communities, and it does get maybe more tense. That can lead to stress for young people.
Right. And we have seen some instances, if somebody in one of these communities does criticize or speak out against that person that they're all supporting, that crowd can turn on them very quickly and have a very negative impact.
Absolutely. So when someone notices that they are having a negative effect from being online, that's a clue in to take a step back and think about another coping tool or something that they can do that will channel a positive emotion to help them feel better.
Okay. And are there sort of any other negative impacts of super fandom, of being a super fan, or is it, just something that we should embrace? I do worry sometimes that people feel a bit embarrassed or ashamed of having such a love, for an activity or a person in a group. how should people navigate that? Are there certain things they should watch out for, or should they just be really proud of this and not be ashamed?
It's a great question. I think being aware of the effects on oneself from being a super fan, again, if it feels like it's interfering with your life, causing you distress, those are signs to be aware of.
Okay.
But I really do think that being a super fan is a very positive thing, and just decreasing the stigma around that is important. If it brings you positive emotions, if you feel like you're still engaging in other aspects of your life, I think it's something to embrace and be excited about.
Okay. And again, we'd love people to join this conversation. I know there's a lot of super fans out there. A lot of people worried that Taylor Swift wasn't coming to Canada, our Prime Minister included. Beyonce, Drake, all on massive tours. Same with The Weeknd. So we'd love to get your thoughts. You can call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Email us bctoday@cbc.ca. Also, love an honest discussion with anybody that feels their fan favorite maybe was troublesome and that it took things too far. How can a person perhaps navigate? We often have seen people, perhaps do some questionable actions, or we'll find out about somebody's, past behavior. How can a fan sort of navigate seeing that person come off the pedestal and feeling kind of personally disappointed?
I think the key here is to, again, take that step back if it's causing anxiety or stress to the point that feels overwhelming, and then re-engage with the topic when one feels ready to do so. I think when emotions are high, it can be hard to take that step back and really think about this in that rational way.
Okay.
I think recognizing people are human and taking for yourself stock of, okay, does this new information that I've learned affect my personal connection or relationship to that celebrity? And if so, okay, well, maybe that's something that I need to be aware of and make a change in where I'm devoting my time. But if not, recognizing, people are human, there might be different sides to them. And I don't really know this person in the way that I know my friends. So to the commenter before about that relationship piece, it is a different kind of relationship.
Sure.
It's a one-sided relationship where you don't really know the whole person.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important to remember that this is a different type of relationship than a normal friendship might be.
Right. But, it's okay to admire these people and perhaps want to emulate them. I think some of these people are great role models for younger people and can show them how to, be confident or explore their creativity.
Absolutely. We think about someone like Taylor Swift, who's obviously very popular. And I think for a lot of people, she is a role model. Mm-hmm. She is a very hard worker. She's very inspiring to many people in that she talks about her feelings in an open way. She's transparent. And I think that that's something that people really are inspired by.
And again, in terms of parents, what are some of the discussions that they can have with their kids? Not just negatively. Obviously, you said, they need to have conversations if they're worried that their kids are taking things too far. But what are some of the positive ways that maybe a parent can be included in this community and can maybe bond with their child over a celebrity or one of these people that their child admires?
It's a great question. And I think having conversations, why do you like this celebrity? Mm-hmm. What is it about this celebrity that's important to you? How do we incorporate this more in the activities that we do together? So maybe it's going to a concert with a family member, or maybe it's doing some other activity that's oriented around listening to music together, for instance, if it's a musical artist. So I think thinking about ways you can bond in your relationship through understanding how your child is connected to that celebrity.
Okay. And, in terms of monetary value, I did hear stories of, the Taylor Swift. I keep coming back to it because it's been so prevalent, I guess, in social media, but Beyonce as well. These tickets are an enormous investment, and people are under a lot of pressure to try to get them. They're paying so much more for sort of third-party prices. How much of a financial impact can this have on somebody? And is that something that they really need to be aware of? Not just the mental cost, but actual cold, hard cost.
Absolutely. It's another great question. I think that it goes back to the point I mentioned regarding interference, where financial stress does have an emotional effect on people as well as a cost effect, as you mentioned. Okay. And I think it's important to be aware of what your limits are financially for each family. And again, I think connection points with your kids around the artists that maybe don't necessarily involve going to a concert if that's not financially feasible,
right,
can allow a child to engage in that and that passion for that artist maybe in other ways that don't involve going to a concert if it's not financially feasible.
I like that there is other ways to enjoy them as opposed to the live concert. We'll take a call now from Diana. Hi, Diana. I hear you are a Trekkie in your past life.
I was absolutely crazy about Star Trek when I was growing up. So I'm over 60 now. So a long time ago when I was growing up, one of the reasons I was so crazy about Star Trek was because it sort of promised a wonderful future.
Right.
So anyways, I was walking through the store with my mother when I was back in my 30s, so it was a little while ago, and she said to me, look over there, there's something about Star Trek. And I said, I'm not really a Star Trek fan anymore. And she went, thank God. Oh. And I had no idea she was so worried about this obsession, because I was pretty obsessed with the show.
Well, how obsessed were you? Like, how much did it impact your daily life? Were you talking in Klingon?
Star Trek, the spaceship. I had a model of it.
Okay.
I had a pin so I could do the communicator stuff. Okay. Now I just think it is being so silly, but at one time I was completely obsessed with the show.
No, and I think that's wonderful, and it's nice to sort of be able to reflect back on that time of your life. Did you agree with your mom being concerned about it? Like, looking back, do you sort of go,
well, now
oh, yes.
I kind of do, because I was so obsessed. I was so sure that we were going to, I thought this time we would be traveling to other stars or systems, and that we would have air flying cars and
you
all
and me
of
both.
that stuff. That didn't happen.
And is that what sort of drew you to Star Wars? Star Trek?
Actually,
Big mistake.
real reason I was so obsessed, I would think, is because at the time, Martin Luther King had just died.
Right.
And it was a promise that we would be living in an equal world. And of course, as I got to be an adult, I saw that wasn't going to happen. But it was this promise that we would have this fantastic future to look forward to.
So a bit of innocence and hope for the future. Dr. Gold, just before we wrap up, I'd love you to weigh in on that. And, thank you so much for that call, because, it can provide people with hope and what they want to see in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that. It's great to hear. And I think that, this connects back to the social importance of these different things that we become fans of.
Yeah.
And I think that the idea that, again, it's overall a really positive thing to be a super fan, because it's something that brings light into the lives of many people.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think it's fascinating, and I think it is important, as long as it doesn't take over too much. So again, thank you for sharing all your time with us and your thoughts. That's Dr. Alexandra Gold. She's with Mass General Brigham in Boston. And that, of course, is our show for today. I want to thank everyone who did call in and who joined the discussion. You can always email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. You can download our podcast at BC Today. I'm Amy Bell, in for Michelle Elliott. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll be back with you again tomorrow. Take care.